Hi there. Over the last couple of weeks, uh, well, back story to this. Over the decades of my interest in occultism, etc., I have become increasingly sensitive to picking up, in quotation marks, the thoughts of others, especially on the internet. Interesting, and especially on YouTube. And often I can get a feeling for what persons or person are thinking about my YouTube videos. My antennae are sort of tuned to picking up thoughts about it. And I think that I get the impression that some people have taken umbrage to my semi-critique, if you want to call it that, of Hermeticism and of occultism and of magical training. And and have started to, being really, really quite vehemently opposed to my views, but they haven't commented or disliked the video. They just switched it off with a cursory cuss. And I understand that. Believe me, I do. Because I have been studying Hermeticism for many years as well. It's something that Aleister Crowley, who claimed to have done a lot of training of his mind, he doesn't say it directly, but he implies that that if people put in as much effort to running the 4 minute mile, which of course hadn't been broken when he wrote his papers, if they put enough effort into being athletic or gymnastic, or playing chess, or playing a violin or piano, into actually training the mind towards some occult hidden purpose, or some transcendental purpose, some magical purpose, magic with a K, they would, two things really. They would find that they had access to dimensions of reality hitherto completely non-accessible by the human mind. And we know nowadays that, there's a myth going around that we only use 5% of our brain capacity. And I think Crowley would actually agree with this. And so the training of the mind would be to actually bring online the 95% of brain activity, which is possible to access, and therefore access other dimensions of a semi-material nature, which might have, given other conditions, a direct beneficial effect on the material universe. So that's one side of it, accessing semi-material or supramaterial dimensions, as I've called them here, and also having having literally being able to have mind over matter, like change matter through the operations of the mind, both externally, that is spoon bending and things like that, and walking through walls, which is just tricks. But I mean, they kind of point the way to what might be possible. And also, although I say that, but my brother could actually he could actually bend spoons. He can do that. I've seen him do it. It's not a conjuring trick. He actually can do it. So mind over matter, external matter, and internal matter, as far as the physiological components of the body are concerned, the biochemical operations of the body, your mind can actually influence the way that your body works, and this has been well documented. Meditation, reducing heart rates and such like. The placebo effect, of course, very, very well documented. That you can convince people that they're taking some kind of medicament when they're in fact not. They're taking a placebo, and from this placebo effect research, has been really the conclusion that there is no difference between mind and body. that in many places and instances, the sort of gap between mind and body, which science has hitherto thought existed, really doesn't apply or breaks down under certain conditions. And then all bets are off. Then it is possible to enter into the world of the miraculous. So, you have external mind over matter externally and internally. You have accessing certain dimensions which have where you can change matter more freely, and where changing matter more freely on these dimensions has an effect, a quantifiable effect on this dimension, on matter in this dimension. And this is sort of one of the assumptions, a couple of the assumptions made by the occult sciences. There are more, of course. And it is all really down to training the mind. You pick up Crowley's book 4 and read part 1 and follow the curriculum of training the mind as laid out there. Admittedly, I do think it needs modernising, the language especially, and some of the methodologies need modernising. But if you were to do that conscientiously for years on end, you would notice certain things. You would notice yourself becoming more psychic, more able to read people's minds, to read people's feelings, just by looking at them for a few seconds. You would notice that you can, tell when people are coming to tea, when they're a mile away, like dogs can. The universe is actually becomes much smaller, and everything becomes much more interesting when you start training the mind to be super sensitive to everything that is around us that we don't have any access to normally. And you do develop a sixth sense, literally the sixth sense. And this sixth sense can make you become aware of things completely outside this physical realm. There is no doubt about that. This has been documented, even quantified, experimentally verified by various people. But obviously, and people throughout time, of course, have augmented the training of the mind with the ingestion of psychoactive drugs as well. Of course, you can't just take drugs on their own, which you just become a drug slob. But in combination with rigorous training of the mind and of the body, because you've got to keep the body fit and physically tuned up and toned up. It's no good training the mind if the body is slouching, or if the body is like a big fat slab of lard. You've got to train the mind and the body, and of course yoga brings the two together, which is why a lot of yogis say that siddha or magics can arise as a result of doing hatha yoga and raja yoga, which is training of the mind, and pranayama, which is breath awareness, etc. You can build up a tremendous magical power to do pretty much anything you want to do under the will. Indeed, change in accordance with will, which is the basis of Magick, and change of consciousness as well, if we're going to go with Dion Fortune's definition of Magick. But this basically amounts to the same thing. You change your consciousness through Magick, and you're able to jump in and out of the time track and do the most extraordinary things at will. Okay, and it can come. When you and Crowley says, or he implies, that like people can do extraordinary things with their bodies. Yogis, martial arts experts, people do karate. They can literally put their head through a brick wall without injury, without a scrape, and the wall just crumbles. You could bend bars. The most extraordinary things that people have done, and they're not conjuring tricks. You can knock someone over with chi energy. People say they've seen this happen with people who are experts, but of course the word is expert. The word is trained. And when you think today, kids of 15 years old are doing things on a violin that 200 years ago they said no human being could play. It's like Kids of 15 years old can play, pieces of music which really a human being can't. Well, you wouldn't have thought would be able to play, and yet they're playing them. But of course, they do practice for 8 hours a day, and you do have to practice and practice and practice. Training the mind doesn't come easily. The mind doesn't want to be trained. The mind wants to just do whatever the mind does. It's very conservative. It's very resistant. It's very fearful. It's very stubborn. It's very slothful. It's very neurotic, and it all plays all sorts of tricks on the will to stop the will from training the mind. If you think of the mind as like a team of horses behind a cart, unless you're experienced with handling horses, they're going to go everywhere. The cart's going to tip over. All manner of accident can arise. So training the mind is extremely important. But Crowley said, you see, that training the mind is the future of humanity. If humanity put all its energies into, from young children into training the mind to do extraordinary things with matter, to do extraordinary things with your own body, to do to enter into dimensions, where science fiction and fantasy writers, they only dream of these worlds, but these worlds actually exist and can be accessed through training of the mind. But you have to start young, you have to be dedicated, you have to be committed. And I suppose in a way you sort of have to be elitist about it, because let's face it, people do a lot of training on the violin and the piano, but there are very few people that actually take it to the nth level. But there's people that take it, pretty far. And Crowley's point is that you may not be a master magician, you may not have total access to the dimensions, you may not be able to control matter completely, but to whatever degree that you can, this would surely be beneficial to your life and to the lives of others. And that's why he wanted to train everybody into, well, basically, for example, into visualization. There's people that use visualization to cure themselves of cancer. So when we're talking about something really quite helpful to humanity and to our environment as well. So there's people that have done incredible environmental cleanup operations using the mind. But all this, as I said, you're going to poo-poo this. Obviously, you're going to say, well, that's a load of gobbledygook. Unless you've actually done the training, in which case, you're going to say, yes, this is all possible because you've done it. Okay. And people are always saying, we couldn't travel faster than 30 miles an hour. You couldn't have trains, we couldn't have computers the size of a postage stamp. We won't be able to go at the speed of light, blah, blah, blah. You have people saying, naysayers, always saying we can't do this and we can't do that. And then 10 years later, we are doing it. People said you couldn't build bridges. People said you couldn't, what is the wheel? You can't build a wheel. You can't build a round thing which travels along the ground. What are you talking about? That's stupid. Are you mad or what? And then somebody discovered the wheel. Someone discovered the internet. People before that were saying, "Oh, you can't have an internet." Or with, computers talking to each other with protocols. That's science fiction, isn't it? And now it's all coming true. So I know I'm kind of, mixing the planes here. And of course, Crowley himself said, "Now, hang on a minute, you can't go mixing the planes completely." And it is possible through the misuse of drugs, of course, to imagine that you can do anything. And then you jump off the roof thinking you could fly, and you die, all right, because you mixed the planes. So he was very, very cautious about magical training. It's important to keep your perspective. It's important to keep the idea that the material universe is the material universe, and the astral is the astral, and they only coalesce. They're only points of unity between worlds, right? if you draw two spheres and they where they overlap, miraculous things can happen given certain circumstances. But as Crowley himself pointed out, circumstances, of course, enter into it, which is why in your magical diary you have to write down all the circumstances that you think might interfere with your operation, might make you unable to carry out the mental operations required to fulfill the magical operation, as it were. In the same way as an athlete, they have to take note of the air conditions and the humidity before they run a race, because these things are going to possibly affect their performance. And we're talking about microseconds here, of course. We're talking about hundredths of a second. But in Magick as well, we're talking about very, very subtle mechanisms that can be completely off kilter, can be sent off kilter by the slightest change of circumstances or slightest problems, including psychological problems and etc. like that, and negativity and fear coming into the mind. So, I'm aware of all this, and I'm also aware that, obviously, as Crowley would say, lazy people will say this doesn't exist because they can't be bothered to find out whether it does. And if they could be bothered to find out, and if they committed themselves to the magical mental training, they might not be so ready to dismiss all these things that go bump in the night, because some of the things that go bump in the night are really bumping. Okay, admittedly, a lot of them is hallucination, delusion, egotistical fantasy, blah blah blah, and it's very difficult to tell the difference to sometimes as well. So it's not a straight path. It's not like Harry Potter by any means at all. And talking of Harry Potter waving his magic wand, of course, Crowley and other occultists were pretty dismissive of what they call the right-hand path, which is really faith-based religions. And for example, if you take Christianity, which is a faith-based religion, you're basically you're waiting for the king to return. I mean, and a lot of religions have this, that the king is going to return, or the reptile aliens are going to return, or something, and everything's going to be rosy, and the king is going to wave his magic wand, and everything's going to come right, and you're sitting around waiting for the king to return. And meanwhile, over the years, of course, because when he doesn't turn up, you start drawing on more magical stuff and superstitious stuff. You start praying for stuff. This guy who joined the evangelical church because he wanted to get a girlfriend, and he thought if he prayed to Jesus, Jesus would supply him with a girlfriend, you see. So we're talking about like literal, lesser black magic sort of superstition, summoning Jesus to get you stuff. Which doesn't seem to me to be very spiritual, really. But anyway, it's, over the years, over the millennia, of course, faith-based religions do absorb a lot of magic, and magical beliefs and superstition and gobbledygook and some mental training as well, and some actual magical stuff which actually works. That gets absorbed by the faith-based religion as well. So, you're waiting for the king to return, you're praying for stuff. You also get this idea that remaining good, chaste, pure, observant of rules, upholding values, this is also what you've got to do in order to bring back or to speed up the return of the king as well. There's sometimes a sense of, causality here. If I'm a good person, then Jesus is going to come back quicker. Sort of thing, and you're trying to control the energy, direct the energy to your will, which smacks of magic to me. Okay, so a lot of magic can enter into religion, and again, if you draw a pie graph with religion and magic, there are places where magic and religion overlap for sure, and have done for millennia. So because there is faith and then there is magic. But of course, Crowley would be very dismissive of faith. He said, you don't need faith. You need to train your mind. You need to do the work, and then you don't need faith because you will have knowledge. You will actually know things. Like we know the boiling point of water is 100 degrees Celsius. You will know that if you do the magical training in Magick book 4, part 1, When you do a ritual, having become expert at the visualization, expert at training your mind, focusing your mind, you will get results from your magical operations. But if you're just going to do the magical operation, for kicks and thrills, you'll get nothing. Or you'll get a smack in the face, or you'll get some kind of demonic possession, or some kind of psychological crash out. So be very careful. This isn't a game. These aren't toys we're playing with. These are real things. So Crowley would be very dismissive of faith-based religions. He wants to train the mind. He wants to get proficient at visualization and concentration and focus and all the other things, and become psychically sensitive. He wants to train the mind to do all this. So does people like Dion Fortune as well, the servants of light. But then we come on to the third way, and I'm perfectly willing to acknowledge all this. Okay, but hear me out a minute, because I think Gnosticism is a middle way. You see, because Gnosticism says, well, you can train the mind, you can do simple exercises, visualization, breath awareness exercises. You don't have to become too proficient at them in order for you to become suitably prepared for the Holy Spirit to enter your life, or that particular moment in time. And what I'm saying is that this is a way of connecting yourself to the infinite, to the truly transcendental, whereas magic simply connects you to the worlds which are part of the demiurge, even though they're supramaterial, even though they're psychically charged, even though they enable you to bend spoons and walk through walls. And the question, what does this actually do? What does this matter? The ability to do all these things, what does it matter? Well, you could say curing yourself of cancer is a good one. Okay, if you can use magic to do that, that's surely good. I mean, if everybody, used their minds to cure themselves of diseases, chronic and acute, the hospitals would be half empty. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it wouldn't work out all the time, but if it worked like 50% of the time, think of all the millions and millions and millions you'd be saving on hospital bills, and medical the medical industry would save millions. But then, of course, people will say, well, the medical industry doesn't want to save millions. They want to have an industry, don't they? So they're peddling bad health, and they're peddling the idea you can't do anything about anything, because they want to, control. They want to get money out of pharmaceuticals and procedures. So they don't want you to train your mind so that you can cure yourself of cancer, and they certainly don't want you to say on the internet that you can cure yourself of cancer by doing visualizations, but people have. Okay, that's all I'm saying. People have cured. I'm not saying you could. I'm not saying I could. I'm not saying 100 people out of 1,000 could. I'm saying that people have. Okay, remember that. It's a very different claim. I'm not making claims here. I'm just telling you certain things that I've become aware of over my life. But I still think that all in all, we're still playing the demiurge's game. We're still material. I mean, I know the alchemy thing, you're taking matter, you're taking lead and you're making it into gold. In a way, you're putting your body, you're putting your mind into the test tube, into the alchemical apparatus, and you're heating it, you're doing the training, mind training, and you're creating a different type of matter. You're creating, your mind is able to, your will is able to control matter. So you're turning the whole system from lead, from being sort of governed by Newtonian causality, Newtonian forces, and you're turning the whole of matter on its head, and you're making it subject to the human will, which is the alchemical dream. And I know all this, I know about filtration, and I know about sublimation, and I know about, we're refining matter to the point where it's possible to actually do anything with matter, to make matter plastic, so it no longer is subject to the laws of physics and gravity and all that and causality. You're changing all the rules, and I know that metaphysics believe entirely that the mind can control can alter, change everything. You can change the game, you can change the rules of reality through magic. But it's still material, it's still matter. It may not be lead anymore, but it's still gold, and that's still matter. That's still not transcendental enough. So my mantra, you see, with all this is not transcendental enough. But a lot of people are going to say stuff and nonsense. This is pretty transcendental stuff to us. The ability for the mind to bend spoons and walk through walls and get rid of cancer cells and and do all the rest of the things that the mind is capable of doing when it's trained sufficiently enough. That's pretty transcendental to us, friendo. But I'm saying it's not transcendental enough. But neither am I saying that waiting around for the king to return with his magic wand. I'm not saying that is the answer either, because whilst you're waiting, you're going to get dragged into magic and superstition and gobbledygook and quasi-science and pseudoscience and all the rest of it. You're going to get dragged into the material, to the demiurge's various snares, and you're not going to be even aware that you are. So that's even worse, really. At least the Hermeticist is aware that they can become deluded, and they are aware that superstition can enter into it. They are aware of ego. They're aware of wishful thinking. They're aware of all the things that the tricks that your mind can play on you. Your mind wants to convince you that you're there. You've got it. We're a magician now. We've done it, and it does that because it doesn't want you to push ahead. And do the training to really penetrate the veil. It wants to trick you into believing you have penetrated the veil when in fact you haven't, you see. And magicians and hermeticists are well aware of all the tricks that the mind can play. But I'm saying that the tricks of the mind are going to win in the end, because we're still in material, we're still in the realm of the demiurge, we're still in Maya, we're still in illusion. We haven't got really out of the clutches of the ego and self-delusion. We just think that we have. And so no matter how powerful a metasystem magician you are, no matter how careful you convince yourself that this is real and not delusional, it's all delusional. It's all Maya. It's just more refined Maya, So that's what sort of my critique of Hermeticism. But fair enough. I understand if you want to pursue Hermetic training, then please do, because there's no doubt that you could make your life and the life of other people much better if you did train your mind to the nth degree and become a magician, a pure magician. And I think that perhaps we are meant in some way to develop psychic power and magical power. But we're only meant to do it insofar as the demiurge simply wants a more refined dish created so that he can feed on something a bit more refined than just gross matter. So that's why I'm wary and suspicious of the ultimate goal of Hermeticism. I'm suspicious of where it's ultimately going to. I don't think it's going anywhere ultimately. Whereas I think Gnosticism is. Gnosticism is where you follow a life of purification and contemplation and introspection and visualization even, and you're opening yourself up to the transcendental, to the infinite, but you're not doing it on the basis of faith alone. You're doing it on the basis of experience, but you're not trying to direct the experience. You're not trying to force the issue, if you like. So you would do all this spontaneously and not obsessively. You don't have to practice mind control, for 8 hours a day using a Gnostic method. It's spontaneous, it's soft, it's gentle, and it's extremely effective. But also, you're not trying to make it effective. The Holy Spirit will come in when the Holy Spirit comes in, sort of thing, You're not trying to summon the Holy Spirit as if it was something that you could summon. Whereas if you're a magician, everything is up for grabs. It's possible for everything to be summoned to you. You become a magnet for all the forces of the universe to approach and to coalesce with. but not so with Gnosticism. You may be becoming a magnet. Well, you're not becoming a magnet. You're becoming a lamp of light that is a light. But whether the moth is going to come to this light is another matter. It is dependent on forces that you have no control over, nor should you have any control over these forces. And yet, I'm not saying it's a faith-based religion, a faith-based religious approach either. So I think Gnosticism operates in a kind of as a middle path, really, between what might be called the left-hand path, which is the magical path, the Magick path, and the right-hand path, which is the faith-based religion. So you've got left magic, right religion, and I'm saying that Gnosticism occupies a middle ground, really, between these two. So it is experiential on one hand, but it's not directive on the other. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And obviously, if you don't agree with this, then I have no problem with you. I understand completely why you should think that magic is a goal worth pursuing and a path worth traveling, because there's no doubt about it that that you could do good for other people. But are you going to connect to the ultimate goodness of the transcendental? That's my question. But you may not wish to ask this question, and you may not wish to think about the answer either. But if you want to go beyond faith-based religion into Gnosticism, well, that's a different question and a different answer altogether.